All right. Hello, everyone. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Rachel and I am the Marketing Manager for Asia Pacific here at Acquia. So today's presentation is called Customer Experience, the 3 key factors shaping CX redesign in 2021. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any questions for us, we are saving time at the end. So please be sure to use the Q&A or chat windows to submit your questions and we'll bring them up at the end. So this presentation is being recorded and we will share it with you at the end of the session. We have with us today Phil Cook, our Marketing Cloud Director for Asia Pacific. So Phil has over 2 decades of experience working with global businesses, helping them leverage digital technology to grow revenue, reduce costs, and drive customer engagement. So he's passionate about making organizations more customer and data-centric through embedding data-driven personalization, experimentation, and human-centered design. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Phil. So all right, Phil, take it away.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for the great intro. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. Really appreciate you coming along today. Look, I'm just going to kick right into it. And look, what we're doing here is we've got a new webinar series for 2021, which we're really excited about. Some of you may have been at the previous webinar series that we had on CDP and digital maturity last year. So this year we have a brand new webinar series, and the focus for this year's webinar series is on CX and customer experience is a key theme. So what we've looked at is some of the trends, global CX trends from our recent survey, and we're going to be using those as to derive some insights for the remaining sessions and for this session as well. So the dates for the remaining webinars have been locked and loaded, so please do join us for the upcoming series. Today specifically, we'll be looking at the results from Acquia's recent global CX survey, and with a particular focus on how CX trends across Asia Pacific compare and contrast with those global trends. So it was a very exciting survey. Some of the topics that therefore we'll be exploring today include, where and how brands are investing in CX. So what's happening in the market, where people are putting the money, where they think they should be investing to deliver a better CX. What's working and what's holding them back, how consumers' trust with brands is evolving, and also how approaches to CX have changed and also evolving due to COVID-19, the pandemic and other factors. So in this particular webinar, we'll talk about the survey, but we'll also talk about why it's important and why it's important now. And then we'll introduce those 3 key factors which are shaping CX, or we believe are shaping CX, and will continue to shape CX throughout the course of 2021. So then for the next 3 webinars, we'll be exploring these key factors in more detail. So on the 25th, we'll be taking a deep dive into how open source technologies can drive business value and really accelerate that digital transformation. And on the 18th of March, we'll be looking at the role of talent and change management. So the people aspect of creating exceptional digital experiences and some of the feedback that's come from the surveys around people. And then finally, on the 8th of April, we'll be covering how using modern technologies can help CX through things like personalization and intelligent automation. So there's a lot of really exciting stuff coming up. So hopefully a number of you can join us for the upcoming webinar sessions. So just to start off with, I'll just take you through a little bit around the survey. Just as a reminder, the CX survey is a global survey. We also have done regional surveys, so we'll talk through that. The survey results can be downloaded from our website in our resources section. So if you're interested after this, you can definitely go online and go to the resources section of the Acquia website and download the survey results. So this survey was commissioned by Acquia. It was completed in July 2020, and the respondents to the survey were 8,000 consumers, and so there was 1,000 consumers from each of the locations listed below, so Australia, France, Germany, etc. And there were 800 marketeers, so 800 marketeers, so that means 100 marketers from Australia, France, Germany, Singapore, and the other countries listed below. So it's a reasonably in-depth survey, and there's some really interesting trends which we'll go through. So I guess the second point is why is this important now, and why did Acquia create this survey? So we did it for a couple of reasons. One is to help inform our customers' digital strategies, and of course to inform our own digital strategy. So we want to understand how consumers today are rating their digital experience with brands and what impacts has had COVID on the digital experience economy. And of course, what's happening in Asia Pacific compared to some of those other global markets. So are we leading the curve here across Asia Pacific? Are we lagging do we have the same challenges as marketeers globally, and our consumers thinking the same way in terms of their experiences? So as I said earlier, through the survey, we identified 3 recurring trends, and we're going to deep dive into these trends in the other webinar series that following this one. And again, if you're wanting to download the surveys, please do go online, and there's definitely opportunity to download those surveys. So just before we jump into the survey results, I just think it's really important that we acknowledge one of the largest market forces right now, which is the reality of a new global pandemic. So this is really forcing marketing executives to rethink their customer engagement strategies and consider new ways to stay competitive. So everything that we might have thought was real prior to the COVID hitting the world, I think a lot of organizations are now actually rethinking their strategies end to end, given the changes which have happened in the market. And according to McKinsey, which is some relatively recent research, 70% of executives feel that the pandemic is likely to accelerate their pace of digital transformation. So organizations that thought they perhaps had years to map out new digital strategies and had projects which were 3 to 5 year plans and things like this. I mean, these, right now with pandemic and with the requirements to change at such significant pace, these organizations have been forced to pivot, to think differently, and really to outpace the competition in the quest for the new digital economy. So if there was ever a kind of a drive to drive digital acquisition, digital retention, or to use digital and leverage digital channels more effectively, that time is now. So as consumers shift online, and we'll have a look through some of the survey research which shows those changes in consumer behavior across Asia Pacific, they're starting to engage deeper with those brand experiences. So it's really more critical to actually develop relevant experiences which are based on a really good understanding of and solid understanding of the customer. And at the same time, this is a slide which was from a previous presentation, but I think it's really relevant as well for this particular discussion, because as consumers, increasingly our expectations are evolving, and they're being set by Apple and being set by Google, by Facebook, and by Uber, by Airbnb, Netflix, and Amazon, and those are the kind of brands that we engage with every day, and those are the kind of experiences we enjoy. So these experiences are created by huge, innovative, well-funded enterprises who are what I would call driving the digital agenda globally. So they're the ones who have the scale, they have the intelligence, they have the technologies and the innovation, and they're really driving what I would call the digital consumer agenda. And what these companies have in common is they have the ability to deliver personalized experiences at scale. And these personalized experiences are based on a very, very strong and rich customer-centric data model. And they manage to deliver these experiences based on that data model and understanding of the customer seamlessly across multiple channels. And they're also constantly improving the customer experience by augmenting the understanding of the customer at every opportunity. So whenever you interact with one of these brands through a digital touch point, or through in some cases through their call centers or through their retail operations, that data is being fed into their understanding of you as a customer, and therefore that enables them to deliver a better customer experience through that knowledge. So most marketing leaders understand that the more engaged consumers are across their channels, the more loyal they will be, the more they'll spend, and that will improve their lifetime value. So that's why it's really important to deliver consistency and consistent relevant experiences to consumers based on these real customer data points. But as we'll see from the survey results, there are a number of challenges that are creating obstacles to achieving these CX objectives. But before we jump into the challenges, I just want to talk through the benefits and some of the what happens if you get it right. So a recent study by American Express showed that US consumers, and we don't have this data for Asia Pacific, but we can use this US data as a start, that they're willing to spend significantly more with companies that deliver an excellent customer service. So the data point here was 17% uplift in what consumers are willing to spend based on that alignment with excellent customer service. So if you have a really consistent product and experience and a consistent delivery experience, customer service experience, or mobile app or retail experience, and obviously consumers are likely to stay engaged, And this means that they're more likely to be open to further upselling and cross-selling initiatives. And that's really what we're trying to achieve here as marketeers. And the other thing is that brands that offer an exceptional customer service, they can sell more and they can sell more often. So by creating these deeper relationships with their customers, they can extend the relationship from, for example, from products only to products and services, or vice versa. And they can also start to do activities like driving consumer recommendations. Excellent customer experience also drives customer lifetime value. And ultimately, the value of a business is based on the aggregate of their customers' lifetime values. So I just wanted to start with that to say that US consumers are clearly interested in customer experience and see that an excellent customer service actually is critical to that relationship. But as we know, it can be difficult. So, I mean, what we're going to start looking at through the survey is why it's difficult and what are some of those challenges, and potentially what are some of the areas where technology or people or things like personalization can improve the experience. But what should brands be thinking about? I mean, firstly, it's really important to be where your customers are. So we know that there's this massive proliferation of digital channels, different apps every day, devices, different ways of consuming media. So it's really important to understand how you can deliver what your customers need at their point of need, and make every single customer touch point an engaging and rewarding one for the customer. So obviously, if you have 3 or 4 positive touch points and then a couple of negative ones, the overall experience is a real detriment to your brand. So it's that consistency of customer touch point experience, which is really, really critical. And ideally, brands can also go above and beyond what the customer is expecting and create surprise and delight moments that exceed customer expectations. And unfortunately, I think we've all had those experiences, which either that we're having to retell our personal situation to a call center agent, even though you've had previous interactions online or in store, or perhaps you've provided that same information to a couple of different agents. And in a digital context, maybe you're seeing ads for a product online, which you're interested in, but actually ultimately purchase that in store, but you continue to see those products. And these are just messages from brands that actually, they don't have that joined up view of the customer. And so therefore they can't deliver that excellent experience. So why is it difficult to deliver these experiences that consumers expect? And with that in mind, I think we'll just jump into some of the survey results, and we'll start going through, some of the figures that have come out of the research. So just before we kick off, I'd just like to point out that the data that we're looking at today comes from the global results, as well as survey results from Australia and Singapore. As I mentioned earlier, we had the respondents in the Asia Pacific region represented by Australia and Singapore. So for the purposes of this webinar, you'll see a small flag up in the corner, top right-hand corner, and that will indicate which country we're talking about in terms of the data. And today we're going to kick off with Singapore. So firstly, this is incredible. 87% of consumers in Singapore say their digital experience with brands has changed since the start of the pandemic. So you can see why that is. Social distancing, you can see how that plays out in terms of the new ways that consumers are working, communicating, making purchases, managing their relationships, and engaging with brands and digital channels. What we found in the survey was that brands in Singapore are actually very well equipped to deal with this pivot to digital. 87% of marketers actually thought in Singapore that they were well prepared for the shift, and that was versus 83% of brands globally. So there's some positive signs in Singapore in terms of the preparedness for the digital shift. Over the past year, brands strategically implemented technology platforms that have no doubt supported the transitions that the year of the pandemic required. So the feeling there is that a lot of this investment or this thinking had already started pre-COVID. Obviously, COVID accelerated that, what the data is telling us from Singapore is that the market was actually relatively well prepared in terms of global comparison for the arrival of the pandemic. And indeed, actually over 89% of marketeers in Singapore felt that their ROI, their return on investment on technology, had actually improved over the past year. So we can derive from that there may have been some projects which we would call optional, and that they weren't necessarily driven by ROI, and that what the pandemic did was really draw into focus that those projects that needed to shift the dial in terms of that customer experience, or the ability to create engagement with customers across multiple channels, perhaps that they hadn't had to before, with the closing of retail, etc. And so perhaps that was a driver for why that ROI had increased. And the other thing really is that the customer experience has changed in Singapore extensively and hugely during the pandemic. So as you can see with the data here, more than half the consumers are buying more things online than before. Maybe that's not surprising. But the other thing that's interesting is that consumers have expanded the brands where they buy from. An incredible 20% also now say that they prefer to interact with brands online than with the real person. So I'm based in New Zealand. I'll just give you an example from New Zealand and my experience during the pandemic and lockdown. There was a company here, Bid Food, which was prior to COVID solely servicing B2B. And they were focusing on providing food and catering services to a very well-established range of New Zealand businesses. And then with the lockdown and with the increased consumer demand and direct-to-consumer, they pivoted and launched a direct-to-consumer B2C delivery offering. And that was really specifically designed to cater for that increased consumer demand and these changing digital experiences that we have right across the world. So if I shift briefly to Australia, Australia too has shifted online. So 65% of consumers have indicated that their digital experiences with brands during COVID has changed. 1/3 of Australian consumers report their digital experience remains unchanged, and that compares to 25% globally. But interestingly here is 31% of consumers bought more online than before, compared with 40% globally. So this perhaps point to the fact that Australian consumers had already established good digital and trading transactional relationships with brands, and so therefore there wasn't so much of an uplift. But one thing to note in Australia, which came out of the results, was that there has been a kind of a social effect in terms of the economic repercussions of the pandemic, and Australian has expressed a desire to support local businesses. So almost 1/4, like 24% of the respondents, the consumer respondents in Australia, reported buying more from independent or local businesses in store compared to just 19% globally. And what this does is it creates an opportunity for these smaller or local brands to ensure that their CX can compete effectively. And they need to do this to make sure that they can make the most of their consumer interest and be competitive in a global market. So I talked earlier around a few of these key trends that have come through from the data, and I guess we'll put them into 3 buckets, and these are in technology and talent and touch points. I'll go into these in a little bit more detail now, and then, as I said, the future webinars will cover off these, the data coming out of the surveys and potential insights in a lot more detail. So first, if we talk about technology, marketers in Asia Pacific have invested in marketing automation and customer data platforms and low-code tools, but they are behind the average for other areas, machine learning, for example, personalization and content management systems. So leveraging these technologies and exploring how an open platform can tie their customer data together and power experiences will allow these brands to modernize their CX. If we move briefly to talent, the data shows us that the chief marketing officers, the CMOs in Asia Pacific, are setting their vision for their CX in a fast evolving context. So it's not as though they're lacking in vision in terms of what to do, but the challenge that they have is that many of them are doing so and they're faced with workforce reductions due to COVID-19. So obviously it's challenging economic times, and there have been a wide number of layoffs across many digital teams right across the region. And this has, to some extent, created skill shortages in both marketing and technical roles. There were certain roles, as we'll see from the data moving on, that were in short supply anyway, and with COVID-19 even more so. So finally, if I just sort of touch on touch points, personalization and personalized touch points remain a significant focus for brands in this region. So many organizations are wrestling with getting the technology in place to gather and to segment and create actionable personalization. So technology will be a major focus over the next year that helps to address this issue in terms of bringing these personalization capabilities in-house. And implementing or continuing strong data policies have also been shown as being a priority item. So this is also relevant to Australia. Australian brands have spent the last year aggressively investing in marketing and CX technologies. In fact, Australian brands lead the technology curve, reporting that they embrace the following technologies ahead of global peers. So we can see from the chart there, you know, well up on marketing automation, 71% are investing in that space as opposed to 63% globally. Customer data platforms, we have 59% investing in CDPs versus 54% globally. Obviously a slight uplift as well in AI and machine learning, so advance in that space, and personalization. It's interesting that actually some of the challenges reported, despite this kind of renaissance or this investment, have been interesting. So there are some challenges, which are things like the inability to capture customer data effectively. You know, it's been 40% versus 30% globally. So even though they're investing in the technologies to enable this, they're actually starting from a place behind their global competition. Some of them reported that the technologies are too difficult to use. So that's 32% of Australian businesses reported that. There are often too many vendors to choose from. So making an informed decision around which vendor to go with has become a challenge. And also there's a confusion around where to get started. So there are many key competing priorities, particularly as the changing demographics of consumer behavior unfold with shifts in COVID and stores opening and closing. So there are many competing priorities, and knowing where to get started has been shown to be one of these challenges. Moving back over to Singapore, brands in Singapore have also been investing in critical areas, and many of these are also ahead of their global peers. Brands in Singapore had a technology foundation in place, I mentioned already, so they were relatively well placed to deal with COVID. Based on those recent investments that they had made in marketing and CX solutions. And these robust technology stacks supported their ability to pivot. However, brands in Singapore also lack capabilities in adopting artificial intelligence, machine learning, and content management systems. Brands also encountered obstacles that point to the need for open platforms to support greater data control. One of these shortages was employees. One of the challenges was employees. So you can see here that there was a reported challenge in terms of filling those seats, 46% versus 39% globally. Budget is an issue. So of course, with some challenges in revenue comes challenges in costs. So budget has been a challenge. Lack of expertise as well as data in silos was reported as being challenges to creating a fantastic CX. So one of the key ways that brands can transform their CX is to rely on open customer experience platforms. And open CX platforms can actually help drive results for these a couple of ways. Firstly, by removing the data from silos and developing a customer-centric open data model, it is much easier for brands to build and automate and deploy campaigns across channels that deliver both personalization and business impact. An open platform breaks down traditional monolithic tech stacks into multiple business capabilities that can act as a catalyst for digital transformation and open up opportunities to meet any unique situation in a fast, personal way. And it's true that companies can't predict the future, but they will need to be able to adapt to the present quickly. So what this requires is integrating with new technologies and being able to communicate and deploy content simultaneously across a myriad of touch points, channels, devices, and modalities. And this will really form the basis of the topic for the next webinar. So if you're able to join us on that webinar, that would be fantastic. The next thing I'd like to touch on is talent. And as we know, people are at the heart of every business, and despite evolution in technology, there are these significant talent gaps, both regionally and globally. In short, there is a shortage of talent to drive the CX transformation across Asia Pacific. One of the key outtakes is that strategically deployed technology can help increase capacity and support new CX and marketing initiatives by closing those talent gaps. And it's not just about automation necessarily, because a lot of people, when they think about using technology to support or close talent gaps, it's around process automation, and it's about automating marketing automation, for example. But that is part of the equation, but also technology that reduces the need for specialized and hard to find talent to deliver an exceptional customer experience. So back to Australia, from the survey, more than half of Australians' brands rely on their CMO to drive the CX vision. However, the gaps we've noted here are quite large, I guess. 46% of Australian businesses noted trouble in finding enough people to work in digital customer service. Brand marketing leadership also is a struggle, and also is a struggle compared to our global respondents. And similarly, the machine learning engineers, there's a distinct shortage of machine learning engineers available to support Australian businesses as they go through the CX transformation, and simple things as well, like web developer talent. So 36% of businesses are struggling or reported that they are struggling to find enough people, qualified people to help their web development teams, build what they need to move quickly. Brands in Singapore are similar. So you'll see here that the survey revealed that the brands in Singapore also have struggles in finding talent, brand marketing leadership, etc., digital customer service roles. I mean, that's 54% of businesses found it very difficult to find digital customer service roles. You can also see that there was a large discrepancy in data analysts and scientists. So 46% of Singaporean businesses said that they struggled to find data analysts and scientists. And these can be very, very critical roles to really actually drive that CX transformation. But the reality is that talent shortages don't necessarily have to slow you down. For example, low-code platforms make it easier to build, deploy, and analyze campaigns without sophisticated programming knowledge. And where there is a gap in campaign capacity, for example, technology can help address that talent shortage as well. So I guess the second key insight and this is what we'll be covering off in the second webinar following from today, will be how you can help close those talent gaps with technology. So as we've discussed, brands are struggling with critical roles such as digital customer support, growth marketers, brand marketing leadership, and other roles. And marketing automation personalization tools can help deliver scale customer experiences to customers at every touch point without requiring the access to specific talent. So we'll focus in on this in the third webinar. And finally, I'd like to take you through the results that relate to customer touch points. So personalized touch points remain a significant focus for brands in Singapore. As many organizations wrestle with getting the technology in place to gather and segment, technology will be a major focus. I think it's interesting that you'll see in the coming slides just that the actual changes are significant in terms of how consumers are interacting with media and with digital channels. So this chart here shows the shift in Singapore's digital landscape. So you can see that overall respondents reported increased usage of the following channels at a greater increases than the global peers, and massively increase in social media usage, video streaming marginally up, email even is up, but big things like video chat via mobile app. So when organizations are considering their data strategy going forward and their customer data strategy, they need to think about where consumers are spending their time online, how they're engaging, and how brands are able to collect that data and understand those interactions and feed those interactions into a unified view of the customer to actually start building a really effective personalization. There's other mobile apps too, such as productivity and gaming apps. So the end result here really is that in Singapore, just like the rest of the world, but you can see that Singapore is amplified, consumers are shifting online and they're spending a lot more time online than they had previously. So this has led to personalization being one of the key areas of investment across Asia Pacific, and I've got some data in terms of what that looks like. But just before I jump into that, I would say that first and foremost, personalization is important because consumers get very frustrated. We all get frustrated with websites where content appears that have nothing to do with our own interests. So 74% of consumers have reported that in previous surveys. And Gartner says that by 2025, 80% of personalization efforts will be abandoned due to the lack of measurable ROI or the costs and challenges of data privacy and data ethics. So we'll talk a little bit about that too, around data trust and data privacy and data ethics. But of course, while organizations can invest in personalization and in CX transformation, you have to get it right because there aren't any guarantees, and so it's really, really important to work with partners or work with a partner which can guide you on that journey. If you do get it right, there's some very, very positive uplift. So This is a little bit like the intro slide around the uplift in terms of revenue from a positive customer service. But this here is talking about from e-consultancy, a piece of data which says organizations showed a 19% uplift in sales. That was the average uplift for marketers who were able to quantify the improvement tied to personalization. So if you get it right and you're able to measure and track the impact of that personalization, the average uplift will be a 19% uplift in sales. So obviously that correlates to the equivalent revenue from the excellent customer service that I reported earlier. So comparing side by side, brands across Asia Pacific, as I mentioned, have been investing in personalization. So 43% of respondents in Singapore, and slightly higher in Australia, they've been investing in personalization. 45% in Australian brands have reported they have been investing in personalization, and in Singapore, it's on par with the global results, which is about 43%. So just under half of businesses are actively investing in personalization. So this is really positive because it shows that we are not at all lagging in our thinking when it comes to developing personalized customer experiences. For example, if globally it was 43% and maybe in Australia it was 17%, it would show that Australian businesses are not really taking personalization seriously. But for the fact is that they're a couple of points ahead of the global brands and Singapore on par, that shows that personalization is well and truly on the agenda. And then here, this is really a slide from the research which shows why personalization is so important. So brands that have implemented personalization have seen benefits. So some of these benefits have been increased conversions, as you would expect. So 55% of brands that are leveraging personalization see increased conversions. Much better response to discount offers through personalization. So making sure that you're sending the right offers to the right people and starting to understand things like propensity to buy, or whether you actually need to send that discount coupon to that individual, or would they have bought anyway. These are the kind of things which they're starting to see the uplift, and repeat purchases as well. So again, by understanding a customer's behavior across multiple touch points and being able to leverage that data, draw the insights, and then send that data through to customer engagement channels, you can increase those repeat purchases. And 44% increase in repeat purchases is truly remarkable. So we know personalization is important, but there is a but. And that but is that the data shows that there's a clear trust gap. And we talked a little bit around trust and ethics and data privacy. So what a trust gap is, it's essentially the gap between how many consumers marketers think are comfortable sharing their data with brands versus how many actually are. And you can see the results here from the Australian survey. You can see that Australian marketers are really much too optimistic about consumer trust. Just 51% of Australian consumers are comfortable sharing personal information with the brands. But marketeers, they were significantly unaware of the trust gap, and they believe that 86% were comfortable sharing data with their brands. So this is actually really important to consider, that when you are creating that or building that trust with consumers, don't assume that they're comfortable sharing your data with your brand just because you have an exceptional brand that's recognized in the market. It's generally a lot lower than you would expect. And if we look at the same data for Singapore, you can see that 57% of consumers in Singapore are comfortable sharing their personal information with their brands. But marketers also are overestimating the marketers' willingness to provide the personal information. So just 69% of marketers in Singapore believe consumers trust brands with their information. Okay, so obviously there's not as much of a trust gap as we've seen previously, but it's still something which is highly relevant, and you need to think about that. So obviously delivering personalization requires consumer data. So how can brands work to close this gap? Firstly, you need to be very transparent about the data you're collecting and give consumers control over their information. Consumers that understand what data you're gathering, how it's being used, and how they can stop sharing data are much more likely to trust brand intentions. You may need to also make it easier for your consumers to see that you comply with data regulations. Despite significant forces like GDPR, many consumers are still very, very wary of protecting their personal information. So you need to use clear language to outline your approach to compliance with data regulations. simplify opt-ins and unsubscribe processes to further strengthen trust. And finally, you need to deliver real value in exchange for their information, building trust with customers by showing an immediate return, such as meaningful personalization, showing them how the personalization will benefit them, and also giving them discounts or relevant content based on those personalizations will start to build that trust. So when we look at the benefits of personalization in Singapore, it's been reported that there's increased brand engagement, increased conversions, as I said, better response to discount offers, more repeat purchases, and increased time on page and digital channels. This is not dissimilar to Australia, but what I would say here as well, delivering personalization also requires a strong customer data set, and it also requires a strong understanding of the tone that you should be using when you're personalizing your communications. The evidence shows that in Singapore, they are much more flexible in the response to the marketing tones. And we've got a few here. The full list is in the report, which is available for download on our website. But what Singaporeans found appealing in terms of the tone was engaging and understanding tone. They found that very appealing. 57% of consumers said they found that appealing versus 37% globally. Creative tones they found engaging, so 50% versus 36%. They wanted brands to be fast and agile in response to ongoing events. That was also important. And they also found it acceptable to have a light-hearted and humorous tone. Obviously, this would depend on the brand context, but 35% of consumers in Singapore indicated they found this appealing. So I guess as a final insight, and what we'll be talking about in our last webinar in this series is, what techniques that you can use as brand marketers to address the trust gap, to really make sure that you get personalization right, that you derive some of the benefits we talked about, that you build trust with consumers as opposed to eroding trust. And a key theme from the research was really the importance of personalization. As we discovered, nearly half of Singapore's brands, so about 46% of their brands in Singapore that we interviewed, they identified personalization as a core strategy to connect with consumers. And brands that implement personalization see a lot of benefits. So in the last webinar, as I mentioned, we will discuss the role of personalization in customer experience and what to be thinking about in terms of technology and data strategies required to deliver effective personalizations. So bringing it all together, and I guess summing up, marketers in Asia Pacific have invested in marketing automation and customer data platforms, low-code tools, yet they're behind the global average for many other areas of innovative technologies like machine learning, personalization, and content management systems. Leveraging these technologies and exploring how an open platform can tie their customer data together and power experiences will allow brands to modernize their CX. If we look at talent, CMOs in Asia Pacific are setting the vision for their CX in a fast evolving context, but most of them are facing workforce reductions due to COVID-19 and skills shortages in both marketing and technical roles. Strategically deployed technology can help increase capacity and support new campaigns by closing talent gaps. And finally, on touchpoints, personalized touchpoints remain a significant focus for brands in Singapore. Many organizations are wrestling with getting the technology in place to gather the data, to create effective segments, and to create actionable personalizations. So technology in this area will be a major focus over the next year. In summary though, brands across Asia Pacific were well positioned to offer digital experience that consumers demanded during COVID-19. However, as brands develop plans for the future, embracing open platforms can eliminate challenges and help overcome talent gaps. With a focus on strategic technology and addressing the data trust gap, Asia Pacific businesses are laying the foundation for a long-term winning digital CX this year and beyond. So of course, if you'd like to learn more about how Acquia can help in this space, we will be delighted to talk to you. We are here to help. We are here to help you deliver a better CX. You're here to help you understand how we can leverage technology and how we can get you to deliver on those promises of effective personalization. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. As I mentioned previously, there are 3 more webinars coming up. On the 25th of Feb, we'll be talking about open source technology and what the advantages of going to an open source technology in the space can bring to businesses. We'll be talking about on the 18th of March, the role of talent and change management in creating these exceptional experiences. And finally, on the 8th of April, we'll have a last webinar in this series, and we'll be talking through how to enhance CX through creating personalized and automated solutions. So with that in mind, thank you again for coming along and hearing from me in this webinar, and I'll pass back to Rachel.
Thank you, Phil. All right, so I just sent you guys a survey form that you can fill up. We would love to hear your feedback about this session and prepare for the following sessions as well. So please put your feedback in the form that we've just sent out. And while we wait for your questions, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function, the chat windows, or in the Q&A windows. All right. Otherwise, we will see you in our next session that's coming out on 25th of February. And we'll stay on for a little bit to wait for some questions if you guys do have any. All right.
I did just see one question which I've responded to in the chat, which was there was a question around how Acquia can help advise in creating CX strategy. We do have a digital strategy team, so we have some very qualified digital strategists who do this. And so definitely, if that's something of interest, please do reach out and we can have a conversation around that.
Okay, so thank you guys for attending. So the slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted on our website, and we'll be also sending it to you by email. So be sure to look up for that. And also the CX report that Phil just went through for the Australia and Singapore edition, it will also be available on our website as well. The links will be provided in the thank you notes that we'll be sending out in a bit. Okay, so we'll see you guys in the next webinar series, all right? Thank you guys for attending. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.